Hello and welcome. Today, we re-embarking on an epic journey through time to explore one of the most influential and controversial entities in world history, the British Empire. At its zenith, it was famously said that the sun never set on its territories. But how did this relatively small island nation build the largest empire in history? And what is its lasting legacy? Let's dive in. Our story begins not with grand conquests, but with tentative steps in the late 16th century. Queen Elizabeth I, eyeing the riches Spain and Portugal were pulling from the New World, encouraged privateers like Sir Francis Drake to raid Spanish ships. This wasn't empire building yet. It was more like state-sanctioned piracy, but it planted a seed. The first real attempts at colonization in North America, like the lost colony of Roanoke, were fraught with failure. However, in 1607, Jamestown was established in Virginia, marking the first permanent English settlement. This was the humble beginning. Simultaneously, another crucial development was taking place: the rise of trading companies. The East India Company, chartered in 1600, wasn't a government body but a private corporation with immense power. Initially focused on the spice trade in modern-day Indonesia, it was eventually pushed towards India by the Dutch. There, it established trading posts, or factories, in places like Surat, Madras, and Calcutta. For over a century, its presence was primarily commercial, not territorial. But that was about to change dramatically. The 18th century was a turning point. The rivalry with France exploded into a global conflict known as the 7 Years' War. In North America, Britain's victory secured it Canada and vast territories east of the Mississippi. In India, Robert Clive's victory at the Battle of Plassey in 1757 effectively handed the East India Company control over the wealthy province of Bengal. This marked the shift from trade to rule. The company began collecting taxes, administering justice, and acting as a de facto government, its private army enforcing its will. This period, often called the First British Empire, was largely centered on the Atlantic world, North America, and the Caribbean, with its profitable but brutal sugar plantations fueled by the transatlantic slave trade. But this empire soon faced a crisis. The American colonies, frustrated by taxation without representation, declared independence in 1776. The subsequent war ended with a British defeat, a stunning blow that seemed to signal the end of its imperial ambitions. However, Britain was about to pivot. Losing America forced a strategic rethink. The focus shifted eastward, towards Asia and the Pacific. Captain James Cook's voyages had mapped vast new territories, including Australia, which was soon established as a penal colony in 1788. The 19th century became the true imperial century for Britain. Fueled by the Industrial Revolution, Britain had unparalleled economic and military power. Its factories needed raw materials: cotton from India and Egypt, rubber from Malaya, and new markets to sell finished goods. The Royal Navy, the most powerful in the world, protected these trade routes and projected British power across the globe. This was the era of gunboat diplomacy, where the threat of naval bombardment could open ports and force favorable trade deals, as seen in the Opium Wars with China. The scramble for Africa in the late 19th century saw Britain acquire huge swathes of the continent, from Egypt in the north down to South Africa. Visionaries like Cecil Rhodes dreamed of a Cape to Cairo railway line, a continuous link of British territory. The justification for this rapid expansion was often framed as a civilizing mission, the idea that Britain was bringing progress, Christianity, and an end to the slave trade to less developed parts of the world. This was the white man's burden, a concept that, while perhaps genuinely believed by some, also served as a convenient justification for economic exploitation and political domination. By the dawn of the 20th century, the British Empire governed nearly a quarter of the world's population and landmass. Its territories included vast dominions like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa, which had significant self-governance. But it also comprised the jewel in the crown, India, and a myriad of colonies, protectorates, and mandates across Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean. Administering this colossal entity was a complex task, managed by a relatively small number of British officials who relied on local collaborators and the principle of divide and rule, exacerbating existing ethnic or religious tensions to maintain control. However, the seeds of decline were already sown. The two world wars drained Britain financially and morally. The very ideals of self-determination and freedom that Britain claimed to be fighting for were eagerly adopted by nationalist movements within the empire. In India, Mahatma Gandhi's campaign of nonviolent civil disobedience captured the world's imagination and made British rule untenable. The granting of independence to India and Pakistan in 1947 was a watershed moment, triggering a domino effect. Over the next 2 decades, a process of decolonization swept across the globe. One by one, colonies in Africa, the Caribbean, and Asia gained their independence. For the most part, this was a relatively peaceful transfer of power, but it was sometimes marred by violence and civil strife as newly independent nations struggled to forge identities from the often arbitrary borders drawn by colonial powers. The Suez Crisis of 1956, where Britain was forced into a humiliating withdrawal from Egypt by American pressure, starkly revealed its new status as a secondary world power. The empire was officially over. So, what is the legacy of the British Empire? It's incredibly complex and deeply contested. On one hand, you can point to the spread of the English language, parliamentary democracy, common law, and infrastructure like railways and ports. The empire undeniably connected the world in new ways, laying the groundwork for modern globalization. On the other hand, the legacy is one of economic exploitation, the destruction of local industries, and the imposition of political structures that often led to instability and conflict after independence. The empire was built on a clear racial hierarchy and was responsible for immense suffering, from the horrors of the slave trade to devastating famines and brutal suppressions of dissent. Today, the debates continue. Calls for reparations, the return of looted artifacts like the Elgin marbles, and a more honest appraisal of imperial history are growing louder. The story of the British Empire is not a simple tale of heroes and villains. It's a multifaceted story of ambition, trade, violence, and cultural exchange that fundamentally shaped the world we live in today. Its echoes can be found in global politics, economic systems, and the very identities of nations and people on every continent. Understanding this history, in all its complexity, is crucial to understanding our present. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the rise and fall of the British Empire. If you found this interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time.